Wargamers, it's Mike from epicduckstudios. Welcome to the Epic Hobby. Today I'll be painting a Tactical Legionary in the Ultramarines colors from the Betrayal at Calth box set. I'll be starting by base coating the model with Macragge Blue. I'll be using a wide flat brush for this. I find it works really well for getting up underneath the arms and armor plates of the Space Marine, especially in the areas between the shoulders and the body. I'm basically just slathering the paint on the whole model at this point. What I'm careful to do here is brush it out so that there's no clumps or any areas where a large amount of paint has pooled. Basically want to make sure that you spread it evenly over the whole model and you don't end up with any areas where it might be obscuring detail or drying too thick. When you're base coating a Space Marine, it's good to pay extra attention to the areas between the torso and the neck, the torso and the arms, and the torso and the backpack. Basically, everything attached to the torso is a bit of a trouble area. You just want to make sure that you get paint in the areas that you might not necessarily see very well, but you'll obviously notice them if they're completely unpainted later. With the blue complete, I'm going to base coat all the areas I plan on painting with a metallic silver later, with Eshin Grey. This is a fairly dark gray. I'm also going to use it to base coat the bolter body, even though I'm going to paint that with black later, simply because it's got a lot of adjacent areas that are metal, and I want to make sure that there's no gaps between the two spaces. Because I'll be going over this with either a metallic paint or black, it's okay if a little bit of blue shows through it. You don't need perfect coverage with this coat. Aside from the bolter, I'm also going to be painting the straps around the torso armor, the vents, the little pipes on the side of the helmet, and the little pipes on the side of the backpack as well. As well, there's a wire on one foot. I'll also be painting that here. As you can see, this is a pretty time-consuming step. There's a few areas where I accidentally got some gray on the blue spots, specifically around the armor joints. So I'm going to go back over them with Macragge Blue just to make sure they're correct later. I use this kind of back and forth error correction quite a bit in my painting, especially when I'm trying to paint quickly. It is much faster to fix mistakes than it is to paint incredibly carefully and avoid them in the first place in a lot of cases. Next, I'm going to base coat the eyes with Mephiston Red. And once again, I'm pulling out the Macragge Blue just to make sure that the eyes have a really good shape definition. A little bit of the red kind of bled outside of the area that I wanted it. Here I'm painting the bolter body with Abaddon Black. All the other areas that were base coated with gray earlier are intended to be bare metal, so I'm going to go over them now with Ironbreaker. This is a fairly bright, metallic, silver kind of color, and it looks really good over the Eshin Grey, with the Eshin Grey sort of leaving some shadows in areas that we don't really apply it to. The last step of our base coat is going to be using Balthasar gold on the shoulder pad trim. This is a very dark gold, almost more of a bronze type color, and it gives very excellent coverage. And I'm demonstrating the back and forth error correction technique one more time. The Balthasar gold was a little bit wider than I wanted in a few places, so I'm just covering up the blue again. I'm going to highlight the gold specifically on the upper facing surfaces, so pretty much just the front and top of the shoulder pads. I'm using Gehenna's gold for this, kind of a weird name. It's a very nice bright gold though. This is probably the scariest step when painting this model. We've done all this base coat work, and now I'm going to slather a dark wash over it, in this case Nuln Oil. I'm literally applying this to the entire model at this point. You may notice that my Nuln Oil is in an eyedropper instead of a normal GW pot. I've began the process of transferring most of my GW paints over to eyedroppers because I do enjoy using them more. You can get a bag of about 50 eyedroppers on Amazon for just a couple bucks, and with a little bit of flow aid to make the GW paint a little bit thinner so it comes out of the eyedropper nicer, you get a very good ability to measure out your GW paints. I particularly find it gives them a longer shelf life because GW paints in the pot are notorious for drying out. Alright, and with the wash finished, we just need to let that dry for about half an hour. The wash is fully dry now, and you can see the model looks a fair bit darker. I'm pulling the Macragge Blue out again, and I'm going to go over all the armor panels to make sure they're nice and bright. We want to leave the black in the shadows and on sort of downward facing areas to give us our natural shading, but we do want to make sure that we're not working from a really dark standpoint on the whole model. It's finally time to start edge highlighting this model. I'm going to be using Calgar Blue, which is a very nice light color that complements Macragge Blue quite well. I'm using a very fine-tipped brush for this. In this case, I'm using a Winsor Newton Series 7, size 1. You can see it comes to a very sharp point, even though it's a bit of a longer brush. And I'm just going along each of the edges and very, very lightly tracing that edge. This is a fairly time-consuming step, but it's also very rewarding when you see how it looks at the end. With the Calgar Blue highlights done, I'm going to add some extreme highlights with pure white. These are basically very sharp points on the model, or very sharp edges that I really want to draw some attention to. It really makes the model stand out when you add this. You can see that I'm mostly focusing on sharp corners or very, very select points of a curve. breaking out the Ironbreaker one more time just to brighten up a few of the metal spots that were a little bit dulled by the black wash. The same goes for the gold shoulder trim. I'm going to use Gehenna's gold one more time and just brighten them up a little bit more than they already are. At this point, most of the painting is done. I'm going to go ahead and freehand an Ultramarine symbol now. I'm using Eshin Grey, mixed about 50-50 with white and thinned down with water. This isn't what the final color is going to be, but I'm sort of using this as a tracing medium. You can see I'm actually plotting out a graph of sorts on the shoulder pad to make sure that it's nice and centered and my different aspects of the symbol are going to be well balanced. I am just eyeballing all of this, so there might be a little bit of error. It may not be absolutely perfect, but you can see I'm just going around and I'm more or less placing a bunch of guidelines on the shoulder that are kind of even with each other on each side. What I'm doing right now is I'm defining the outer bounds of the U shape. Here I'm drawing the line that'll form the two cross pieces at the top of the U. These two shorter strokes will form the gap in the middle of the U at the top. Now I'm defining the bounds of the inner area of the U. Now it's time to start actually drafting the curves for the inner and outer parts of the U. Now that I've drawn all the guidelines I need, there's actually some that aren't really needed anymore. They're just there to guide the other guidelines. So I'm going to use Macragge Blue to erase them. This in particular is why I used gray and thin down to trace this rather than white. It's so that I can go over it in one coat instead of needing 2 or 3 to hide it. Now you can start to see the Ultramarine symbol really taking shape. With all the extra guidelines erased now, it's time to start filling in the design with pure white. I have thinned this down a little bit because pure white can be a little bit of a thick paint, and as such it's going to take probably 2 or 3 coats over the whole area to really get good coverage, so it's going to look spotty in different parts of this. White is traditionally known as one of the nightmare colors to paint because of this. It doesn't go on very smooth in a lot of cases because white pigments tend to be fairly large pigment particles. So you either end up with a clumpy result or you need to thin it down a lot and do a lot of layers to get a good result with your white paint. Traditionally, the easiest way to paint white is to not actually paint white, but to paint a very, very light gray and simply highlight certain parts of it with white. here I'm using the Macragge Blue one more time, just to go around the U symbol and sharpen up any lines where the white might have been a little bit uneven. I want the eyes to look much brighter than they are now, so I'm going to use Wild Rider Red, which is actually a fairly bright orange, but it's very, very suitable for highlighting red paint. And I'm just going to add a little dot of this to the center of each of the two eye lenses. The miniature is just about done at this point. I'm going to go ahead and just black out the whole base with Abaddon Black. I haven't decided what I'm going to use for basing material on this model yet, so this will just detract from the fact that it looks like a paint palette instead of a base at the moment. One of the last aspects to paint here is the bolter body. I'm going to use Eshin Grey to just add some edge highlights in a similar manner to what I did with the armor. And again, similar to the armor, I'm also going to use a bright color to add some extreme highlights. In this case, I don't want to go all the way to white, so I'm using about a 50-50 mix of white and Eshin Grey. And at this point, the miniature is complete. I'm really happy with how this turned out, and I had a lot of fun painting this miniature. I hope you enjoyed watching it as much as I enjoyed making this one. I'll be painting more Horus Heresy color schemes in the coming days, so stay tuned for Word Bearers and Salamanders coming up, followed by other legions after that. Thanks again for watching, and as always, do something epic.